The land was dry, cracked beneath the weight of a long summer. Dust carried on the wind, whispering across the plains. In that emptiness, a woman walked, holding her child tight against her chest. The boy was small, barely more than a bundle, his cries muted by exhaustion. She had nothing left but him, and the clothes she wore. Her husband had fallen months before. She remembered the knock on the door, the folded flag, the words spoken without warmth. His family had turned on her soon after, saying she was never one of them, saying the land and the cattle were theirs. They forced her out, newborn in her arms, grief heavy in her bones. She wandered from one empty promise to another until her feet carried her into the barren stretch of open country. She thought about stopping many times, sitting on the hard ground, waiting for the desert to finish what his family had started. But the boy stirred each time she faltered. His tiny fingers gripped her dress as if to tell her he was still there, still alive, still needing her. So she kept moving. The trail led past abandoned fence posts, gray with age. A crow circled above, a black speck against the white sky. The woman's steps slowed, her lips dry, her hair clinging to her damp forehead. She whispered to the boy, though he couldn't yet understand her words. Promises that she would not leave him, that she would find a way. The land gave no mercy. Hours blurred into one another, and then, through the shimmer of heat, she saw smoke. A thin column rising from the distance. Her heart stumbled inside her chest. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant someone lived out there. She gathered what strength remained and pressed forward. The house came into view slowly, rising from the earth like it had grown there. A small ranch, nothing grand. Weathered boards. A corral with a single horse moving lazily inside. A well, the handle of its pump glinting in the sun. A man stepped out from the shadows of the barn. He was tall, but carried his frame without swagger. Dust clung to his shirt and hat. His beard was trimmed close, streaked with gray. He stood still, watching her approach, eyes narrow against the light. The woman froze. Her legs trembled beneath her weight. She wanted to call out, but her voice failed. Instead, she shifted the child in her arms, letting the man see. He did not move at first, only lifted his hand to shade his eyes. His gaze dropped to the boy, then back to her. Her breath caught. She braced for him to turn away, to wave her off like so many others. But he didn't. He stepped closer, boots sinking into the dust. The horse in the corral lifted its head, ears twitching. When he reached her, he didn't speak. He simply looked at the child, then at the woman's face, reading what the road had done to her. His eyes were calm, but not cold. After a long pause, he shifted his weight and gestured toward the house. Her knees nearly gave out from relief. She followed him across the yard, clutching the boy. The air smelled faintly of hay and smoke. A dog barked once from inside, then fell silent as the door opened. The man stepped aside, waiting for her to enter. She did, moving like someone crossing into another world. The dim coolness of the small house wrapped around her. The boy stirred, restless in her arms. Inside, the room was simple. A table, 2 chairs, a stove with an iron kettle resting on its surface. She stood uncertain, her body tense. The man closed the door behind them, shutting out the glare of the sun. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt the weight of silence that was not cruel. She turned to the man, words stuck in her throat. His face remained unreadable, but something in his stillness gave her a flicker of safety. The boy whimpered. She adjusted the blanket around him, her hands shaking from exhaustion. The man crossed to the stove, poured water into a tin cup, and set it gently on the table in front of her. No questions, no demands, only the smallest gesture, but it reached deeper than any kindness she'd known in months. Her lips parted, but she did not thank him aloud. Instead, she sat, holding the boy close, staring at the cup of water as though it were salvation itself. The rancher leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching without judgment. Outside, the wind shifted. The crow cried overhead, but inside, for the first time in a long time, there was space to breathe. The first night was heavy with silence. She laid the boy down on a folded blanket by the wall, his breaths soft and uneven. He slept almost instantly, spent from the journey. She sat near him, hands clasped, unsure if she should close her eyes. The rancher moved about quietly. He lit a lamp, its glow casting long shadows across the wood. He pulled bread from a tin, set it on the table, then left her portion without a word. She hesitated before eating, but hunger pushed pride aside. Each bite felt strange, almost painful after weeks of scarcity. When she looked up, he wasn't staring. He chewed slowly, gaze fixed on the window, the dog resting at his boots. It was as though her presence changed nothing in his rhythm. Yet every small act, the water, the bread, the space he gave her, was a message she could not ignore. That night, she did not undress. She lay on the floor beside the boy, her body curled protectively around him. The boards were hard, but sleep came anyway. At dawn, she woke to the sound of boots outside. Through the small window, she saw him already at work, hauling water from the well, feeding the horse. His movements were steady, practiced, shaped by years of repetition. She rose slowly, lifting the child into her arms. Her instincts told her to leave before she became a burden. But the boy's eyes were open now, watching her with quiet trust. She carried him outside. The sun had barely cleared the horizon. The air was cool, the kind that faded too fast in the desert. She stood awkwardly by the porch, unsure if she was welcome. The rancher turned at the sound of the door. His eyes dropped to the child. He gave a single nod, then went back to work. She followed. He lifted a pitchfork, scattering hay into the trough. She shifted the boy on her hip, then bent to gather fallen straw with her free hand. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't stop. The rancher paused. His gaze lingered a moment, then he returned to his task without comment. It was the beginning. Through the morning they worked side by side, unspoken understanding guiding them. He lifted what she could not. She did what her hands and strength allowed. The boy watched with wide eyes, sometimes fussing, sometimes quiet. Each time she stopped to soothe him, the rancher carried a little more weight until she could rejoin. When noon came, they returned to the house. He poured water again, set it on the table. She drank slowly, eyes fixed on her son's tiny hands patting the wood. The rancher leaned back, arms folded, eyes on neither of them, yet not far away either. Hours stretched into days. The ranch was small but alive with work. Fence lines needed mending. The pump creaked. The horse's coat shone brighter with care. She learned his rhythm, not by his words, but by his example. He never spoke more than a few syllables at a time, yet his silence felt less like absence and more like steadiness. At night, she sat by the boy, brushing his hair from his face. The rancher sat at the table, oiling his tools, the lamplight soft on his face. No words passed, but the air between them held something slowly changing. One evening, a storm rolled over the plains. The sky split with lightning, rain hammering the roof. The boy startled awake, crying. She held him close, rocking gently, but her arms shook with fear of the storm itself. The rancher rose from his chair. For the first time, he spoke more than a few words. His voice was low, even, carrying calm through the thunder. He told her the house had stood through worse storms, that the roof would hold, that the rain would pass. She listened, her breath slowing. The boy pressed against her shoulder, soothed more by the quiet tone than the meaning. For the first time, she believed it herself. The storm would pass. When morning came, the world smelled of wet earth. Puddles gleamed in the dirt yard. The boy crawled to the doorway, laughing at the glimmer. She lifted him up, his small hands wet with rain. The rancher stood outside, hammer in hand, checking the roofline. He looked back at them, the faintest hint of something unspoken in his expression. Not a smile, not yet, but the beginning of one. She felt it stir something in her chest. The days built slowly, like fence posts set one by one into the ground. Each act was small, bread on the table, water at her side, a tool passed wordlessly into her hand. Yet together they carried weight. She began to breathe easier, though she never forgot the road behind her. Her husband's family still haunted her thoughts, the cruelty of being cast out, the bitterness of their words. But each time she looked at the boy, then at the rancher's steady hands working in the sun, she felt the ground beneath her feet grow firmer. By the end of the second week, she no longer thought of leaving. She thought only of lasting. Work became the language between them. He rose before dawn, and she followed soon after. Her boy clutched against her chest until the sun warmed the air enough to set him down. The ranch held endless tasks, and though her body was not strong from months of hunger, she pushed herself. She patched clothes with thread he brought from town. She scrubbed pots until they shone, her knuckles raw. She held fence posts upright while he hammered them into the earth, her arms trembling under the weight. The boy grew livelier each day. He crawled through the dust, pulling at tufts of grass, laughing at the horse that bent its head close to sniff him. The dog stayed nearby, never far, as if guarding him. At times the rancher would pause from his work, crouching down to let the boy grasp his rough fingers. He never spoke during these moments, but the look in his eyes softened. It was in the small shifts that she began to see the truth. He was not simply giving them shelter. He was building space around them, shaping his routine so their lives fit within it. He added more water to the trough, left firewood closer to the door, patched leaks before rain could fall inside. He never asked. He simply did. At night, when the boy was asleep, she sometimes sat on the porch steps. The rancher would be outside, too, sharpening a blade or coiling rope. The sky stretched wide above them, scattered with stars. In the stillness, words felt unnecessary. The desert itself filled the silence. One evening, she broke it. Her voice was hesitant, quiet. She thanked him, not just for the roof and food, but for not asking questions she wasn't ready to answer, for letting her simply exist without demanding pieces of her story. The rancher listened, knife resting still against the whetstone. He didn't reply right away. Finally, he gave a slow nod, as if her words had weight he understood. He returned to sharpening, but the space between them felt different, warmer. As weeks turned to a month, her hands grew calloused, her shoulders strengthened. She learned to lift buckets without spilling, to guide the horse with a steady hand, to tie knots the way he showed her. Each lesson came without lectures. He only demonstrated once and let her learn by failing. She respected that silence more than 1,000 words. The boy began taking his first steps across the packed dirt floor. She would catch him, laugh breathlessly, then hold him high until his giggles filled the room. The rancher would glance up from the table, and though his face rarely changed, she caught glimpses of something hidden, a softness that flickered like light through shutters, but shadows still lingered. At night, in restless dreams, she saw the faces of her husband's kin, their scornful eyes, their cold voices. The memory of being cast into the dirt road with a child in her arms still struck her chest with knives of shame. One morning, she woke to find the rancher saddling his horse. He said he was riding into town for supplies. She froze. Would he tell someone? Would her past catch up to her? All day she worked nervously, the boy on her hip, her eyes shifting to the road. When at last he returned, the horse heavy with grain and tools, she stood tense in the doorway. He handed her a sack of flour, then another with dried beans. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small carved toy horse. He held it out to the boy. Her throat closed. The child reached eagerly, clutching the toy in both hands. The rancher didn't speak, didn't smile. He simply turned back to the horse, loosening the straps. That night, after the boy had fallen asleep clutching the wooden horse, she sat at the table across from the rancher. The lamplight flickered between them. She wanted to ask why. Why he, who had nothing binding him to her, chose to carry this burden. But when her eyes met his, the words faltered. His expression was unreadable, but his silence spoke enough. It was not charity, it was choice. The days that followed carried a new weight. She felt it in the way he passed her tools without looking, in the way he slowed his stride when she carried the boy, in the way his boots lingered at the porch steps before he entered. She no longer thought of him as only the rancher. He was becoming something else, though she dared not name it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in gold, she saw him lift the boy high into the air. The child squealed with laughter, arms flailing. The rancher's hands were steady, sure, holding him as though he had always known how. She turned away quickly, heart pounding. For the first time, she imagined a future here. The land grew harsher as summer deepened. Dust rolled across the fields, clinging to every surface. Water had to be hauled farther, and the animals grew restless. The rancher worked longer hours, his shirt soaked, his back bent. She tried to match his pace, though the boy demanded constant attention. When he napped, she hurried to mend fences, gather eggs, or split kindling. When he cried, she dropped everything to hold him. It wore her thin, but she refused to falter. She owed it to the man who had given them this fragile shelter. One day, as she hauled water, the bucket slipped and spilled. She cursed under her breath, knees buckling. Before she could lift it again, the rancher appeared, silently taking the handle from her hand. He filled the trough himself, shoulders taut, then set the bucket at her feet. Her shame burned hotter than the sun, but his eyes never judged. He only gave a short nod, as if to say she'd already done enough. That night, after the boy was asleep, she sat outside with her arms wrapped tight around herself. He joined her, leaning against the post. The desert wind hissed low through the grass. "I'm not strong enough," she whispered. It was the first time she had admitted it aloud. He didn't answer, not at once. Then, slow and steady, he said. "Strength ain't in how much you carry." His voice was rough, almost unused, but the words struck deep. The next days passed with a different rhythm. She no longer pushed herself to breaking. She worked steadily, letting the rancher take the heavier loads. He adjusted too, wordlessly shaping the days so she was not crushed under them. The boy thrived. He followed the rancher everywhere, toddling behind him with wobbling steps. The man slowed his stride to let the child keep pace. When the boy stumbled, he simply lifted him and set him back on his feet. One evening, storm clouds rolled dark across the horizon. The air turned sharp, electric. She rushed to pull laundry from the line, hands shaking. The boy cried from the porch. She nearly dropped the basket when thunder cracked. The rancher was suddenly there, steadying her with a hand at her shoulder. He took the basket, set it inside, then stood at the door as rain pounded the roof. His figure filled the frame, outlined by flashes of lightning. They watched the storm together. Water poured from the sky, hammering the earth into mud. She held the boy close, his face buried against her neck. The rancher's presence beside her was a wall against the chaos outside. Later, when the storm eased, the land smelled of wet dust and grass. She found herself breathing easier, not because the storm had passed, but because she hadn't faced it alone. The next morning, she discovered something carved into the beam by the porch. It was rough, uneven, but clear. Her son's name. She traced it with her fingers, throat tight. She hadn't told the rancher the name. He had learned it simply by listening, by noticing the smallest things. It was then she realized what had changed. This place was no longer borrowed shelter. It was becoming theirs. But with that thought came fear. What if his kindness was temporary? What if one day he decided they had stayed too long? That fear clung to her, even as she worked, even as the boy laughed, even as the rancher's quiet presence steadied her. One evening, unable to hold it inside, she asked, "Why us? Why take us in?" The question hung heavy in the air. He stared at her for a long moment, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. Then he looked past her, out toward the darkening fields. "Seemed the right thing," he said finally. It was all he gave, yet the weight in his tone told her more than the words themselves. She nodded, swallowing her questions. That night, as the boy slept, she stood at the window, watching the rancher cross the yard with a lantern. The glow followed him, small but steady, cutting through the night, and she realized she no longer feared the darkness. The days stretched long, the heat heavy on the land. Work carved deep lines in their hands, but there was a rhythm now, a fragile peace. The boy grew taller, his steps surer. The woman's face carried less fear, though shadows still lingered when she thought he wasn't looking. And the rancher, he had changed most of all. Where once his silence was a wall, now it was a space she trusted, a place to rest her own weariness. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, he brought her to the far edge of the property. The earth there was cracked, scattered with stones. He set down his shovel without a word. She watched as he dug, slow, deliberate, each motion steady. Sweat rolled down his arms, dust clung to his skin, but he didn't stop. When at last the hole was deep enough, he knelt and placed something inside, a small wooden cross. She stepped closer, heart tightening. "What is it?" she asked. He brushed the dirt from his hands, eyes lowered. "My wife." The words were rough, broken by the years he hadn't spoken them. He stood, shoulders rigid. "She died here, long time back." The air between them thickened. The woman's breath caught. She looked at the mound, then at the man who had carried that grief in silence for so long. "I thought I was done," he murmured. "Thought there wasn't anything left worth keeping alive." His voice faltered, but then he turned his gaze toward her, toward the boy. His jaw worked as though the words cost him everything. "But you proved me wrong." The silence after was heavier than the storm they'd weathered weeks before. She lowered to her knees by the grave, pressing her hand to the earth. Then she looked up at him, tears stinging. "We'll take care of this place," she whispered. "All of us." The boy toddled forward, clutching her skirt, his small fingers tracing the wooden cross. The rancher's eyes softened, though no smile came. Instead, he reached out, setting a hand on the boy's shoulder. For the first time, he did not pull back. That night, they ate in quiet, the air thick with unspoken promises. Afterward, she sat by the fire, mending torn cloth, while the boy slept in her lap. The rancher lingered nearby, working leather straps with his knife. The lamplight painted his face in amber shadows. At one point, her thread snapped. She sighed, tired. Without speaking, he handed her another. Their fingers brushed, and the moment held, suspended. Neither pulled away. Later, as the flames burned low, she found the courage to speak. "If you ever ask us to leave," her voice wavered. "I don't know where we'd go." He stared into the fire, jaw clenched, then set the knife aside. "You're not leaving." The words were firm, unshakable. She closed her eyes, breath trembling. The weight of her fear lifted, piece by piece, until only quiet remained. The rancher leaned back, gaze drifting to the boy curled against her. "He'll need a name here, one folks will respect." She met his eyes, understanding dawning. The firelight flickered between them. Slowly, she nodded. By morning, he had carved it. Their shared name, rough but bold, cut into the beam beside the door. When she saw it, her hand lingered on the letters, her throat too tight for words. The boy reached up and touched it too, laughing softly, as though he understood. The rancher stood beside them, arms crossed, face unreadable. But his silence was different now. Not empty, not hollow. It was full. Full of the family he hadn't expected, the family he had chosen. And for the first time in many years, the ranch no longer felt like a place of ghosts. It felt like home.